Welcome in to Kings of the North, Doug Lesmerises and Bill Landis. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Everybody who's joining us live on the YouTube show. If you are listening on a podcast, if you're watching back on YouTube, we are certainly grateful to have you along with us on Kings of the North. Landis, you're going to be on the ball a lot today. Bill Landis has prepared a lovely meal of a show. It's about how to rebuild in college football. And we are trying to learn lessons, Bill, from Purdue and West Virginia about this. Well, we're trying to learn lessons previously on their behalf because we are going to get to a West Virginia Purdue KOTN Showdown in the second half of this show, Bill. And those are our two schools. That's why we paired them for a KOTN Showdown. Those are our two schools that have new coaches this season. And it's one of those things, Bill, where they have new coaches not because their coaches were so good they went to get other jobs. They have new coaches because things did not go well for them previously. And we're trying to figure out what Rich Rodriguez at West Virginia and Barry Odom at Purdue can do to fix this thing, right?
Yeah, I think I found some programs over the last couple of years. It's mostly in the transfer portal era because I didn't think it made much sense to look prior to that because it's such a big part of how you turn around the program now. So it's really just like the last 3 years. Programs that went from, I think at best something like 3 wins to quite good the following year under new coaches, and some of them were really good. So like it might feel a little aspirational, I guess, for Purdue and West Virginia to compare them to some of the teams we're going to talk about, and that's not really the point. I think the point is just to kind of look at those instances, and we found 4 of them, and see like what led to those turnarounds and if any of it would be applicable to what Purdue and West Virginia are trying to achieve this year. So like, I don't think either one of us is going to sit here and say like, watch out for Purdue and West Virginia. They're this year's Indiana, but in what Indiana did last year, I think there could be things to take from that and try to see if Purdue and West Virginia can strive for them on a lesser level.
It is very intriguing to me, and I am eager to dive into this because is Indiana such a unique circumstance and a one-off that all Curt Cignetti and the Hoosiers have done is ruin this for sort of mid-tier programs who are starting over for the next 25 years? Or did they find something that is at least partially replicable? I think my instinct is like, man, I don't try to be Sigs, man. I don't like that. Like, good luck. That is not how this normally goes. So that is again, it's a dirty habit. I don't think Purdue and West Virginia should take up smoking just because Indiana made the playoff last year.
I think that's right, but we've talked about this a couple of times, or at least we've referenced it. Like, programs have long found ways to be impatient, and then Indiana gave them a new way.
Yeah.
Like to just sort of assess their situation and think that it's not good enough. So I don't know. They probably did set too high of a bar, but I'm sure that there are a lot of programs around the country looking at what Indiana did and saying like, well, why can't we do that? And then we'll see how that impacts coaches.
That is dangerous. Lively in the YouTube chat, just want to give a shout out to Ben. He and his wife are planning to welcome a baby on the 4th of July. They're planning an induction at the hospital. So good luck to Ben and his wife, and also to Ryland, who's streaming this live in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee at an Airbnb with the fam. So hello to Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. We're glad that they allow Kings of the North to come through the channels down. I don't know if you could put a blocker. Could that be a thing? Could governors in the South block Kings of the North on YouTube?
I think they could, yeah. But I like. Remember a couple years ago when the Columbus radio station started playing Paul Feinbaum, and I didn't like that. It's like, why are you going to put this SEC show on in the middle of Big Ten country? So I'm glad we're returning the favor, folks in Pigeon Forge, checking in the Kings of the North.
Can I just say that I did not think you were going to say SEC show there on your station. I don't want to listen to this SEC show. First up, Jake Retzlaff is leaving BYU, and we do want to talk about that. He's one of our starting quarterbacks in the North, or at least he was, and he is no longer, Bill. There is a case that had been filed previously, a civil case, against Jake Retzlaff with an accusation of sexual assault. And now ESPN is reporting this Monday morning that case has been withdrawn. And so that is no longer, it was never a criminal accusation. It is no longer an accusation against Jake Retzlaff. But what happened is that in the course of this case, Jake Retzlaff said he and the original accuser did have consensual sex. And at BYU, the honor code says you may not have premarital sex as an undergrad there. And so reporting from various outlets, again, we appreciate everybody who's on the ground reporting these things, that Jake Retzlaff, because of that, not anything criminal or anything related to the civil suit, just the admission of that was going to lead to potentially a 7-game suspension because of BYU's honor code. And for a guy preparing for his final year of college football, he instead is going to transfer out of BYU, and he might wind up playing quarterback somewhere else, Bill. But obviously, from a football standpoint, this is a big deal for the North.
Yeah, it's a huge deal for the North. I mean, there was some uncertainty around exactly how all this was going to play out. When we did our playoff conversation a couple weeks ago, like I had moved BYU out just because I wasn't entirely sure how this was all going to unfold. I didn't expect this. So yeah, this makes me rethink a lot of things for BYU. It's an interesting quarterback situation now, and we don't know where Jake Retzlaff is going to end up. There was reporting additionally to this from the Deseret News that said he was going to go to a major program that was in need of an experienced quarterback, and like that list is fairly short, and I'm not actually sure how many programs in the North would fall into that category. So like immediately my mind was like, well, I guess Jake Retzlaff's going to the SEC, perhaps like Alabama or Ole Miss, or
I said Georgia, you said Alabama.
Georgia. Yeah, Georgia might surprise me, but Alabama or Ole Miss, I don't think would.
My hat's too far away.
We're just throwing stuff out there. So it'll be maybe we'll have to we'll be on the other side of the Jake Retzlaff conversation. But for BYU and Big 12 title aspirations that felt very real coming into this season, I don't know if this changes that for me. Certainly.
I left briefly on the YouTube channel to go put on my dog hat. I did not mention this the other day. I don't think I did. But did you notice, Bill, or did you notice, YouTube audience, that my swords are hanging on the wall now? Can you see the swords hanging?
I do notice that now, yeah.
And I would say the phrase, I hung up my swords, except that would be a falsehood. My wife hung up my swords. So thank you to my wife for finally, I had ordered the sword holders previously, and now they have taken their, I want to show people how this works. So now what I do is I draw it off the wall, and now I'm ready for action. So now the show's probably the post-game show still on Saturday night during the season. I don't know if I can have the swords in the holders because I think I need them handier than that. Sure. But otherwise, a nice June, July show, just talking ball, I think I can have them on the wall. Yes? More decorative.
It's more decorative, but I also like that they're just sort of lingering there a bit menacingly for anyone who wants to try to cross you. You can get to them quickly.
I like being menacing.
Yeah.
Okay. So BYU brought in McKay Hillstead from Utah State last spring. In 2023, he played 8 games at Utah State as a freshman, started the last 4, played pretty well, went in the portal, and a lot of people were very interested right away. Utah called him, Iowa called him, Cal, Mississippi State, and BYU got him. And we noted it at the time, Bill. It felt like a future starter at BYU. And so he was around last year. And now, do we think he is the starter in 2025 at BYU?
Probably. It's him. It's Trayson Bourget, who transferred in from Western Michigan last year as well. And then Bear Bachmeier is there too. Bear Bachmeier is a freshman who was at Stanford in the spring and then transferred from Stanford after they fired their coach and ended up at BYU. He's a big-time quarterback prospect too. My guess is that it would be either McKay Hillstead or Bear Bachmeier, because Bachmeier is a true freshman and Hillstead has started games before. They're also pretty similar, I think, in skill set. I was watching a little bit of both before we started doing the show just to kind of familiarize myself a little bit. I think because they're of similar skill sets and Hillstead has started in college football, at least some, that he would be the guy. Bourget is a little different in terms of like quarterback style of play. But he's also, he played a decent amount too at Western Michigan. But yeah, I think it'll be McKay Hillstead, and you can watch him and get excited. I think it's just like, you were banking on an experienced Jake Retzlaff to lead that offense, and now he's not going to. So I think you have to downgrade BYU a little bit.
I think it's possible that you could reasonably have more excitement about McKay Hillstead going into this year than you had about Jake Retzlaff going into last year. Because last year at this time, I was like, I don't know.
Oh, that's
Retzlaff
fair.
Is it Gary Bohannon? They brought in Gary Bohannon. They had seen Retzlaff in 23, and they still brought in a guy. And it was like, okay, well, I don't know how that's going to go. And then Jake Retzlaff was great. But McKay Hillstead has shown a little something that I'm intrigued by it. So Jake Retzlaff was obviously a winning quarterback last year, and we were enthused about his return. But I don't know that it is I'm not viewing it as a gigantic downgrade. They're going to get to where they probably were going to get in 26. And listen, Bachmeier's a true freshman. He was a 4-star in this class, number 28 quarterback. I don't think that's where they're going to go. But Hillstead's like a third-year guy who's played. So it's slightly accelerated, but I do not think it is an unreasonable ask. So I will be curious. When we're not going to know. I mean, we'll get great reports from the BYU beat writers in August, but we're not going to really know until we get BYU on the field. But if you were thinking about him for a playoff spot, you're probably not anymore. But I don't think this means that like BYU is not going to be very competitive and very good. I think they still could be.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think it's a good point to mention sort of where they were last year going with Jake Retzlaff, because he was I think as erratic as a quarterback can be in 2023 going into 2024, and you weren't sure. And I think if you watched what McKay Hillstead did at Utah State, you might say the same thing about him. I think his touchdown to interception ratio was even or just about, and he was young. So I think that it's not totally off the table for BYU to have the kind of season it was hoping to have, but obviously it's much more difficult now without an experienced quarterback.
And then also get ready for 2028, right? 2028. It's go time.
Yeah.
Ryder Lyons, 5-star quarterback who committed to BYU, but told Pat McAfee he is planning to do a 2-year mission. So,
yes.
And he's only a senior in high school now, right? He's a senior. He's going into his senior year of high school.
He's going into a senior year.
So have a senior year of high school, and then you would assume a 2-year mission in 26 and 27, and then have a chance to come and be a true freshman, but 3 years out of high school in 2028 as a 5-star quarterback. And look out, we'll be eager to talk about Ryder Lyons at BYU in 2028. But for now, I think it's unfortunate. We don't really have it's opinions on how it went down or the case or any of those kind of things. We certainly are not qualified to speak on that. But from a football standpoint, it's unfortunate. I don't think it's completely devastating to BYU. And we're just going to have to decide how we treat Jake Retzlaff when he's competing with Garrett Nussmeier to be first team All SEC at quarterback.
Yeah. That'll be interesting.
All right. You want to do, let's roll out how to build a football team, brought to you by Curt Cignetti and Bill Landis, because that is what this next segment is going to be. Sigs did it. Landis analyzed it. Barry Odom and Rich Rodriguez, if you're watching, please take notes.
Yeah. So, okay. We have 4 programs here that I analyzed. And again, it's just in the transfer portal era. So there's Indiana from last year and a couple from the 2022 season, which even then feels like another world when it comes to roster building. It has really significantly changed in the last 2 years. But the 4 that I looked at were Indiana last year, and I'll just kind of lay out sort of where these programs were and then where they got to in their turnaround season. And these are 1-year turnarounds. That's the other thing. There are some 2-year turnarounds we'll discuss a little bit later on, but in terms of best examples of 1-year turnaround, I think these 4 are probably it the last couple of years. So Indiana, in the last 3 years of Tom Allen, went 9-27, including a 3-9 record in his last year in 2023, and they only had 1 Big Ten win. And then Curt Cignetti came in and they went 11-1. So from 3-9 to 11-1.
Every time you say something like that, I'm going to pull another one out of the pack because I still can't believe it.
So Indiana is from 3-9 to 11-1 with an 8-1 record in the Big Ten and a college football playoff berth in 2024. Duke was another one I looked at. So Duke in 2021 under David Cutcliffe went 3-9 and 0-8 in the ACC. And then they hired Mike Elko, who was a defensive coordinator at Texas A&M. And in his first season in 2022, he went 9-4 and 5-3 in the ACC. So that was a 3-9 to a 9-4 turnaround for Duke. TCU, again, a pretty substantial turnaround. Gary Patterson in his last year went 5-7 in 2021. Sonny Dykes came in and they went 14-1 and reached the national championship game.
It's easy.
It's easy.
Rich and Barry, get your stuff together. We're expecting at least 8 wins. What are we doing?
5-7 to 14-1, or no, 13-2. I'm sorry, 13-2 with a berth in the national title game. And then the last one was Washington, which was really good under Chris Peterson, and then he left and got bad really quick under Jimmy Lake. He went 3-1 in the COVID year in 2020, and then in 2021 he went 4-8, and there was some stuff like he shoved a player or hit a player in the helmet. There was, I think, some off-field stuff. He got fired after basically his first full season as the head coach, going 4-8 in 2021. In comes Kalen DeBoer from Fresno State, and he goes 11-2 in his first year. So record-wise, the 4 turnarounds we're talking about, again, is Indiana going from 3-9 to 11-1. This is regular season records. Duke going from 3-9 to 9-4. TCU going from 5-7 to ultimately 13-2. And Washington going from 4-8 to 11-2. Again, lofty comparisons for Purdue and West Virginia. But I think for any rebuilding team, there are lessons to be learned from the way that those 4 teams went about their turnaround seasons.
I think for any rebuilding team, they have to hide the record books from their ADs and university presidents. Can I throw one more at you that is different, but also I'll just throw it in the mix?
Yeah.
Northwestern firing Pat Fitzgerald for the hazing stuff, but also they were 1-11, and then David Braun going 8-5.
Yeah, I did not analyze that one, actually. I thought about it, and another one I looked at, but again, I sort of dismissed it because it predated the transfer portal stuff. Was Jeff Brom at Purdue the first time around? I think I deleted it from my notes, but Purdue, I believe, here it is. Purdue was 9-39 with 3 Big Ten wins in 4 seasons under Darrell Hazel, and then Brom won 7-6 in his first year. So, that's a record-wise, at least, I think feels far more attainable for at least Purdue in this sense. It's interesting with West Virginia because West Virginia didn't bottom out last year. They were not as good as they weren't as good as they wanted to be, but they weren't 2-10.
I got stuff on West Virginia.
Yeah,
they were about as classically middle of the pack as you could get. But right. And one of the things here, we just want to be clear with people: we're not talking about the Duke situation when Mike Elko left and Manny Diaz took over, because that's Mike Elko being so good at Duke that he got a bigger job. And at Washington, we're not talking about Kalen DeBoer to Jed Fish, that Kalen DeBoer was so good he got the Alabama job. When we are doing rebuilding, is not my coach was so good he got a better job. Correct. Rebuilding is my coach was so bad he got fired. Mm-hmm. So that's why you have to be not careful, but the only thing that's relevant here is comparing bad programs that bottomed out and fired their coach for football reasons, right? And so that's why these are the thing here that and again, I'm sure, it's not like every single team does this. In your analysis, before we go a little deeper, do you believe in the idea that you might, as a program, be okay and just have an incompetent head coach who is screwing it up? And if you are a power conference team, as long as your resources aren't horribly below the standard, if you make a competent hire, you can jump 4, 5, 6 wins in a year. That competence can be a gigantic difference maker. And no offense, but what happened with Purdue last year and Ryan Walters was not competent head coaching. Mm-hmm. And West Virginia lost to every decent team they played and beat every terrible team they played. If they had a little bit, they didn't have some easy ones on the schedule, they, instead of going to a bowl game, easily could have been 3-9. They were kind of blowing it. And Neil Brown was making excuses in the moment and shooting himself in the foot in news conferences. Yeah. There was a level of incompetence, I think, in leadership that maybe Rich Rodriguez can rectify right away. That can be worth a lot. I think your data is showing here.
I think competence does get you a far way. Now, I guess especially if you're in a situation like West Virginia was currently in last year, or maybe even for the sake of this comparison, like Washington and we'll talk about rosters. Like the only roster that changed dramatically among these 4 teams was Indiana's. So I think that speaks to your point of like the bones of a winning team were there. They just had the wrong guy leading it. And then once they got the right guy in place, it took off but it took off in a way that feels almost unfathomable, right? To go from whatever 4 wins to 11, from 3 wins to 9 wins, like that's a huge jump. So, but I do think that I think a lot of it is confidence, or excuse me, competence, and like alignment with the staff, and kind of like nailing your hires immediately. You don't have to be like radical in your transformation necessarily, I think, to get to that next step.
And I think, I mean, it's difficult with these things. It's like, well, did they hire a good head coach, or is there proof that the hire was good that they won? You don't want to back end and say like, oh, it was a great hire because he won. It's like, was it a great hire in the moment? But the 4 examples you're citing, and I think there is relevance here for West Virginia and Purdue, is like, all right, Indiana, Tom Allen, it just wasn't working anymore. And you could have hired probably a lot of people that, like, Tom Allen had the weird COVID year, but really never got it done overall in Indiana. Duke, David Cutcliffe, just a coach who'd been there a while and was leaking. The balloon was losing air. Gary Patterson, incredibly successful at TCU. The balloon was losing air. And then Washington, Jimmy Lake had never been a head coach, and it just didn't work. So I think so Ryan Walters at Purdue had never been a head coach, just didn't work. And Neil Brown at West Virginia, I think, was both leaking and had never been a head coach at that level. And it kind of just didn't work, and also was getting worse over time. And then often you can look at this Curt Cignetti, winner. Mike Elko, established longtime winner as a coordinator at big time programs. Sonny Dykes, winner as a head coach. Kalen DeBoer, winner as a head coach. Barry Odom didn't necessarily work out great at Arkansas, but won at UNLV, has won more as a head coach than Ryan Walters did. And Rich Rodriguez has had his places where it didn't work out, but he's been more successful as a head coach than Neil Brown was. So also part of this is like, you maybe took a risk, or you were either leaking or took a risk with the hire that you're now rectifying. And then when you do that, you go get somebody who's done it before. And if it's a competence argument, I think you can look at Cignetti, Elko, Dykes, DeBoer and be like, well, we're not surprised they were competent. They had proven they were competent. And I don't know that we're going to be surprised. Are we going to be surprised if Barry Odom and Rich Rodriguez are competent?
No, I don't think so. And I would also say that group of 4 too, the Cignetti, Elko, Dykes, DeBoer. Now DeBoer like won majorly at lower levels, but even with that, like, I don't think, if we could go back and put ourselves in those coaching cycles and kind of revisit how people reacted to those hires, like, those aren't super splashy hires. Those aren't the kind of hires that I'd imagine like the fan bases were clamoring for, right? Even though Cignetti and DeBoer won at an incredibly high rate at lower levels, and Sonny Dykes was incredibly experienced as a head coach, and like Mike Elko was just like kind of ready for that jump up to be a head coach. Like, none of these guys are like Dan Lanning, right? Like that kind of profile. So maybe I actually didn't have that down as a lesson, but maybe there's a lesson in there too. Like, don't get distracted. Dan Lanning's great, but like, don't get distracted by whatever the shiny object du jour is, and just go find yourself like a proven, experienced winner. That's actually pretty smart.
Competence can go a long way. All right. You also found some interesting stuff with like the type of switches that were made, right?
Yeah. So I broke this down into 3 categories to look at. One is staff, one is roster, and then one is schedule. So on the staff front, we can just run through a couple of things. The first is, and this is maybe just coincidence, but it's something you and I have talked about before. In all 4 of these instances, the programs hired a new head coach whose expertise was opposite the previous head coach. So Indiana had a defensive coach in Tom Allen, replaced him with an offensive coach in Curt Cignetti. David Cutcliffe was an offensive coach. Mike Elko is a defensive coach. Gary Patterson is defensive coach. Sonny Dykes is an offensive coach. Jimmy Lake was a defensive coach. Kalen DeBoer is an offensive coach. So, like, to me, that makes sense. It's just sort of, I don't know. It's zigging and zagging, right? And I think just sort of changes the energy in a program. You can go back and find plenty of examples where I'm sure teams have done that and it didn't work. It was part of the reason I was a little surprised by the Barry Odom hire. I think we discussed it at the time, because I figured Purdue, long known for like its offensive innovation, hired a defensive head coach in Ryan Walters, and it didn't work. So I figured, oh, they're going to go back to offense, and then they didn't. They hired Barry Odom, who's a career defensive coordinator. So they're not doing this. Purdue is not, and I guess West Virginia is not either, because Neil Brown's an offensive coach, and we know that Retzlaff is. So the blueprint laid by these 4 teams that we're analyzing is pivot to the other side of the ball, but neither West Virginia or Purdue did that.
And I do think they pivoted in other ways, though, right? Purdue pivoted from take a shot on a hot young assistant who a lot of people were fired up about, and when that doesn't work, you go with the guy who's been a head coach at 2 places, including in the SEC. And West Virginia went from a guy that from App State, who I don't know if Neil Brown was ever fully connected to the West Virginia fan base. And then West Virginia pivoted to like, well, could we get Don Nehlen back? And it's like, no, but we can get Rich Rod back. It's like, okay, like, let's get back to our roots with a guy who is West Virginia through and through. So there's always a pivot. It's just what type of pivot is it? But I do think, again, it's not coincidental. You don't think it's coincidental that the 4 you cited were opposite side of the ball. It's kind of instinct.
Yeah, I think it's instinct. It's certainly my, like, whatever. I'm not, am I actually making hires? No, but if I were, it would be my instinct, I think, to go opposite side of the ball. Just make, like, as a refresh, it just makes sense to me. I guess unless, like, your identity on one side of the ball is so entrenched as a program, maybe. I don't even know. I don't know. I guess you'd say that about Alabama, but then they hired an offensive coach in Kalen DeBoer. So I guess it makes sense no matter what. Yeah, to kind of go the other way based off whatever you had done, whichever side of the ball the hire that didn't work was on before.
Yeah. Okay. What else about anything else about staff here?
Yeah. The one other thing, I guess I was a little surprised by is, like, listen, all of these guys reshaped the staff. Like, I don't want to pretend like they didn't, but none of them cleared house entirely. They all kept at least one person from the previous staff, which I think can matter, right? Especially in the transfer portal era. I think you want to have some familiarity, and you can do that with like lower level staffers with your recruiting department. It doesn't have to be with your 10 on field, or now it's more than 10, but the traditional 10 on field assistant roles. But all of these guys did keep at least somebody, and also, in doing that, it wasn't like they kept one guy and then brought in 9 from their previous job. Like, they all I thought had a good mix. Signetti kept the offensive line coach in Indiana, Bob Bostad, and brought in 9 new assistants, but only 6 of them were from James Madison. And like, there was both coordinators, so you had that continuity. But he went out and got 3 outside hires too from the staff who weren't with him at James Madison. Same thing with like Sonny Dykes kept 2 assistants from the previous TCU staff. And actually only brought 2 of his coaches from SMU with him, his offensive coordinator and his offensive line coach, and the rest were just like sort of outside hires. Kalen DeBoer kept 1 assistant from the previous Washington staff, who was also the offensive line coach. 6 of the new assistants came from his Fresno State staff, and then the rest were kind of outside hires. And the other one that's like Elko wasn't a head coach, so like he didn't have a staff of 10 assistants to just sort of poured over. So he only ended up keeping 1 Duke assistant, and we actually moved him from the position he was coaching from defense to offense, and brought in coordinators from different programs. He only brought 1 guy with him from Texas A&M, which is where he was previously. So it's not like he brought a bunch of A&M guys with him either. So I guess in that, there's just like, don't assume that you need all of the infrastructure that made you successful at your previous stop. Like, keep an open mind as you're moving jobs to, like, if you think there's a way to upgrade or a guy who might give you some different kind of juice at a position, do that, and don't just bring all your guys with you. Because I think one, that can be a little stale, and 2, like, part of me wonders if it can create a like us versus them sort of thing with like, okay, this entire winning staff comes from this school and the roster is not from there, right? And it's like my way or the highway kind of thing that I don't think would be a tremendously good dynamic if you tried to go about it that way. So all 4 of these coaches didn't do that. They brought a lot of their staff, and in most cases the coordinators, but they did go outside for some of the position coaches, which I thought was interesting.
Do you know what Purdue did? Do you know what Odom did?
Yeah, Odom, I have it here.
Because I will say West Virginia Rich Rod kept one guy to begin with, Chad Scott, but then he left in February to be the running backs coach at Texas. So I think there's nobody actually left at West Virginia. He tried, but the guy left. And I think he brought 4 assistants straight from Jacksonville State at West Virginia, plus he hired his kid to be the quarterback's coach, and he had been an offensive analyst at Jacksonville State. So, but 4 of the full-time assistants followed. So, like, not the whole staff. And also, I think part of that is when you do that, you bring your best guys.
Yeah.
Right? Like you bring but you don't just pick up the whole staff. But I think they're not going to have anybody who was part of West Virginia's staff last year. Purdue
does not just have the UNLV coaching staff. Odom kept one guy. He kept running backs coach Lamar Kennard, he's a Purdue alum and he's been at Purdue for 3 years. Okay. And actually running back's probably been like the most consistent position at Purdue the last couple of years. So I think it makes sense to keep him. Odom brought his DC from UNLV, but did not bring his offensive coordinator because offensive coordinator was Brennan Marion, and he got the head coaching job at Sacramento State. Right. So he hired from the outside for that, and he hired from the outside for his quarterbacks coach. So he ended up bringing 4 position coaches with him from UNLV and another 2 who had worked with him when he was a defensive coordinator at Arkansas. So 6 guys that he's like very familiar with and has worked with, and 3 guys who were on the outside and 1 guy who was already on Purdue staff.
Okay. And then Rich Rod made a gigantic hire at defensive coordinator that we'll talk about in the showdown. Yeah. That was like, that's an outside hire that is super splashy. So, I mean, and there's something to that too, right? That if you're a head coach who's jumping up and you're bringing the best of your guys, but now you do have more resources and more money, and then you're adding other guys that probably wouldn't have come to work for you where you were before, and you have a chance. It is. I'm kind of. This happened. Like we talked about it last week. We did rivalry week, and I was like, kill conferences. Just schedule all rivals. And now we're doing how to rebuild a team, and I'm like, fire your coach every 2 years. Just constant refresh, new staff, new energy, 50 transfers. Why would you want any continuity? Try it new. Let's take a quick break. Are we ready to go to rosters?
We'll go to rosters after a break. Yeah.
All right. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Landis dug in on how to rebuild a roster when you got a new head coach. We'll do all of that next on Kings of the North. Back on Kings of the North, Doug Lesmerises, Bill Landis. How to rebuild a team. KOTN Showdown with West Virginia and Purdue, the 2 rebuilding teams later on in the show. Bill, rosters, what'd you find?
So I thought this was the most interesting part of this because I wasn't entirely sure what to expect. And I guess I'll say this off the jump. Like, again, Indiana is in a very different position relative to the other 3 teams that we looked at because transfer portal was just different. So in terms of just volume of additions via the transfer portal, Indiana is in a different tier. So Indiana added 30 transfers in the offseason before Kurt Cignetti's first season. TCU only added 14 before its turnaround year. Washington added 9 and Duke only added 8. So that's different, right? And Purdue and West Virginia are even way beyond what Indiana did.
8 transfers?
Eight. Yeah.
Rich Rodriguez added 8 transfers in the first half an hour after he was hired. What are we talking about?
What? So I did Purdue for the showdown. The total number for Purdue, I think, like subtracting guys who transferred in the winter, then transferred out in the spring, was 51 transfers. So there's another part of this that, again, as much as you did all this wonderful research, is Indiana the only thing that matters? That like to compare this to an era when you got 8, 9, 12, 17 transfers your first year, like what from a roster standpoint? But again, then Indiana also isn't necessarily the thing to compare because Indiana smashed 2 teams together. Yeah. So I think mostly yes,
So
but
crazy.
there's a common thread between these four,
Okay.
and it's that they didn't add the kind of transfers that I think like you and I have bemoaned at times, which is just like, well, this guy's from a power program. Like, okay, has he played? Well, no, but he
Yeah.
played in the SEC. He was on an SEC roster. It's like, okay, well, I don't really care. All of these teams added transfers who did stuff.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
so these four, the Indiana, TCU, Washington, Duke combined, added 61 total transfers. And I going through all of their careers, I would put 43 of those 61 into the category of guys who had good production and or experience at their previous school. A decent amount of them having some form of all conference recognition. That's
Oh,
70% of that pool of players. I think it's a pretty high number.
that is a high
Um,
number.
and like Duke was like all of them, all eight did something at their previous place. Washington, I think, was like 7 of the 9, and then TCU was like half of their 14, and then Indiana was a decent chunk of their 30. Now, part of that's because they brought 13 players from James Madison, but even Indiana, like they went out and got Curtis Rourke from Ohio and Miles Price from Texas Tech and Trey
CJ
Whitting
West.
from Wisconsin, CJ West from Kent State, Sean Asbury from Old Dominion, like all guys who were good at their previous stop,
Yep.
and some of them like Curtis Rourke like won at a high level at Ohio. Like there was a strategy, I think a very obvious strategy with all four of these teams to target experienced players and in many cases like winning players, even if that meant they didn't come from power programs. There are power transfers in all four of these instances, but it's not like all of them were. And a larger percentage of them were from the group of 5 or the SCS or even Division 2. So I think I think maybe that's the biggest lesson I took, like looking at these teams from all this. Like you have to be targeting your transfer portal additions and as best you can. Now it's hard when you're bringing in 50 plus like West Virginia and Purdue, but like find guys who have done stuff, even if they've done it at a much lower level than what you're currently playing at.
So I think maybe the lesson here, and I think maybe what has happened, and in going through West Virginia, because when we did our showdown, you have Purdue and I have West Virginia. I didn't go through all 52 transfers, but in breaking down the roster, you can see the instances where, for instance, West Virginia targeted a guy. It's like this guy was all Mountain West, and this guy, was second team, and they've got a bunch of productive running backs from lower levels, right? So you can see where they do that. But I think in the transfer portal area, where you're also losing more guys out, and you literally have to get bodies to fill out your 105.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
There's a necessity to quantity, not just quality. And there's also an opportunity because there's so many more guys in the portal. It's like, I don't know, we'll take that guy. But you can't have 50. I don't know, I'll take that guy kind of players. You probably need a core of 8, 10, 12, 15, 20 guys who are real players who have shown it on the field. And in the past, that's all you got. But now you can add another 30 wild cards. But if you have 50 what the hecks, you're going to fail. If you have 20 guys you believe in and 30 what the hecks, okay, maybe 4 of the what the hecks also hit, and now all of a sudden you're in a bowl game.
Yeah, and I think this is not the case with certainly not the 3 who had smaller recruiting classes, smaller transfer classes, but even a little bit less so with Indiana. The thing I liked about Purdue, and we'll talk about both teams more in depth later on, is that you can find easily the guys that Purdue brought in who would fit the category of like this guy like was a productive player where he was previously, and like this guy's probably going to start for Purdue this year. But then a lot of the other guys they brought in were freshmen last year at their stop. It's just they didn't play at all, but they have 4 years of eligibility, and you can develop them kind of in the same way you would develop a guy you got out of high school. So if your pool of this guy went to Georgia, so we're bringing him in, and like the only reason we brought him in is because he went to Georgia, if that pool of players is young, then I'm kind of okay with it. It's when you bring in a guy who was at whatever Texas A&M for 4 years and did nothing, and now all of a sudden you expect him to be a good player. It's when I was like, well, that's a waste of a roster spot. Even if you're just trying to fill numbers.
If you're bringing in a guy who's young and never played at Georgia, but now you're planning on playing him.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is,
like I got tricked. I got tricked by Purdue's offseason last year because they had more.
There's a lot of guys from Georgia on Purdue's roster.
And they hadn't, and a lot of them were younger and hadn't done much. It was like, but they were counting on them right away. So there are, and we're all going to get more sophisticated in analyzing transfers because we're going to analyze transfers the same way we analyze recruiting. But there's clearly two different kinds of transfers. There's a play now, and there's a develop. And there's a develop kind of transfer that's not really that different from recruiting. McKay Hillstead is a development transfer. BYU didn't need him to come play quarterback last year, but they brought him in after he flashed and was good at a lower level program. They went after him right away. They didn't let him get roots down at Utah State. They took him now, and then they worked on developing him themselves, and now maybe he'll be ready to play now. So, again, I didn't do that with the 52 West Virginia, but going through it, be like, oh, yeah, this guy is 3 years. West Virginia got a guy from Youngstown State who never played at Youngstown State. And it's like, well, why did they that guy? Well, it's like a recruit. So he has 3 years of eligibility. Just don't tell me he's your starting left tackle.
Right.
If you tell me a guy who never played at Youngstown State is your starting left tackle, that's a problem.
Yeah.
If he's a developmental guy because you like the traits and you like the body and some high school coach told you about him, great. And there's a lot of that at West Virginia where it's like, well, they have some younger transfers, but most of the time, every position, they dropped an older guy who's played and produced on top of them.
Yeah, that's what I think. Again, we'll get into it more. Like Purdue's offensive line, they took 9 offensive line transfers. 5 of them started where they were previously, different levels, but have started. And then the other 4 are all guys who were true freshmen last year. It's like that.
Okay.
Like, that's great. That's like
two. We call it the same thing. That's 2 completely different things.
Yes. You got your 5 starters, and then you got your 4 guys who are going to be starters in 2 years. Yeah.
Right. But you've got to do it all. Okay. I like it. Oh, look at you. I think you could be a GM. Did you finish this and say, I could be a GM?
Yeah. Yeah, I think I could be a GM. Doesn't everybody think that? It's like once you realize
that's one thing you think.
Once you go your whole life thinking like I could play professional sports, and then once you actually come to the realization that you can't play professional sports, you immediately pivot to like I can build a roster.
Yeah, it's like, did I win my fantasy league 2 of the last 5 years? Yeah, I did. Let's go.
Yeah,
I can make Purdue a bowl team. Right. Okay, so roster. So there's roster advice to take, but also there's it's changed so much. Duke and Washington adding 8 and 9, and West Virginia and Purdue adding 50. It's also a completely different world, but you can still. There's some strategy to adapt.
Yeah, it's a completely different world. But I guess I would say this, and again, like Indiana is the outlier here, but even this number surprised me a little bit. Like these rosters, like Duke, TCU, and Washington especially had like actually very good rosters that those coaches inherited. But even Indiana, like I was looking at players who played at least 300 snaps for these teams, which is like I would consider you a core guy if you're playing 300 snaps, even if you're not a full-time starter. 30% of the guys who did that for Indiana last year were already on the roster. Which, like, if you think about the tenor around Indiana last year and how, like you said, they smushed 2 teams together and they brought in all these JMU guys and they brought in some, like, if I told anybody, so like, 30% of their main guys were already on the roster, I think that number might surprise people as being a little high. And I don't know what the minimum number is, right? Like that you must have to as holdovers of guys who can make an impact, but 30% feels like it's getting toward the minimum level. Purdue certainly doesn't have that. Purdue does not. Yeah. Purdue is not going to have 30% of its main contributors be guys who were on the roster last year.
No, so neither will West Virginia.
Yeah, and like Duke was 77%, TCU was 77%, Washington was 86%. TCU after that the year where they got to the national title game had 8 players drafted in the 2023 NFL draft. They were all already on the roster when Sonny Dykes got there.
Oh wow!
And then Washington. 2 years, so after DeBoer's second year, the 2024 NFL draft had 10 players drafted. 9 of them were already on the roster when Caleb.
Oh wow!
The only one who wasn't was Michael Penix.
So there really is a lot different here in this era because Purdue, for instance, in the old days might have been set up for that with some of the guys that Max Clare and Dylan Thieneman and guys like that they had on the roster. Because in the past, right? Is it in the past that when your coach got fired, it wasn't a guarantee that if you were a decent player, you were going to transfer? But now it feels like that is the case. Everybody good.
Yeah.
He's gone. I'm gone. That's it. There's like nobody, which then adds to, well, that's why you have to get 50 transfers instead of 20,
Right.
because everybody left, which is the double whammy of this. And I do think it's not a specific comparison, but for instance, what happened with Washington last season, and that they lost guys to the NFL draft after making the national title game, and then their coach left and they lost a lot of guys to the transfer portal. There is a double whammy factor of coaching changes now, that if you're a little bit of a veteran team anyway, and you're going to lose some guys, and then you have a coaching change and the transfer portal hits you, you can look at your roster and be like, we have 3 of our top 30 guys back.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a different kind of reality too. But because it's like you said, people talk so much about the transfers at Indiana last year, they might be surprised the number of core players was as high as 30%. Yeah. 3 years ago, if you said only 30% of your core players are back from the previous roster, no matter above a coaching change, you'd be like, 30%? Did they abolish the football program? That would have been ridiculous to think that you have 70% of your guys who play are new. But now we talked about Indiana in a way that people would have thought 95% of their guys were new. So 30 actually sounds like a lot.
Yeah, 30 does sound, it does.
All right.
Two more quick roster things before we move on. They all had good quarterbacks, which is like kind of an obvious thing, but Washington portaled in Michael Penix, Indiana portaled in Curtis Rourke, and then TCU had Max Duggan sitting there and Duke had Riley Leonard sitting there. And it also, like, Mike Elko's first season at Duke was like the only season that Riley Leonard was healthy at Duke. So they actually got a full season out of him and they won 9 games. So via transfer, they nailed it if they had to, or they got lucky and just had guys who were ready to be sort of Max Duggan was a Heisman finalist.
But TCU also had Chandler Morris, right? Who was a transfer. Was he a transfer with Sonny Dykes? Because he was the guy who started that year and got hurt, and then Duggan took over.
Yeah. Yes.
So they had, but then when the guy got hurt, then they had a guy sitting on the roster who finished second in the Heisman and led them to the national title game.
Yeah.
So
And then the last thing is, this is just for me mostly, all 4 were pretty good on the offensive line, and only Duke was the only one that had to like remake its offensive line through the portal. Duke added 3 portal starters to its offensive line that year. Also had Graham Barton, who was awesome, like already on the roster. Indiana, TCU, and Washington each only had to portal in 1 transfer starter on the offensive line. They had the rest of it was just kind of sitting there. They were all pretty good.
Just a quick double check. How many returning starters will Purdue have on the offensive line?
None. It was also a bad offensive line, so I don't know if that's that's a bad thing necessarily, but none. Yeah.
West Virginia will also have none. Yeah. So this is one of those great lesson. Hey guys, if you want to rebuild successfully, make sure you really have some foundational guys on the offensive line. And Rich Rod and Barry Odom are like, why are you telling us this now? It's too late. They're all gone. They're all gone. But like West Virginia, they lost their top 6 guys. I think it's 4 guys were out of eligible, like left anyway. We're done. And then 2 transferred. So
it was the same
like,
similar case with Purdue. Like Marcus Bowe was good and he got drafted, and then like Gus Hartwig ran out of eligibility, and that was their best 2. Probably the only 2 you'd want to keep around. And they couldn't, like, even if they wanted to, they couldn't. So,
which also leads to like, that's why the head coaches got fired, because they both had like pretty veteran, decent offensive lines last year and weren't as good as they were supposed to be with those guys. Right. So, all right. So, schedule is easy schedule. That's a good strategy for.
That's another commonality here that I think is worth pointing out, is that all 4 of these teams had pretty easy schedules. Now, I don't want to like give short shrift to TCU. Like, I will say this: TCU schedule I think is the outlier among the group. So I just looked at opponents that ended up with winning records. The average number of opponents with winning records that these teams faced in their turnaround seasons was 4, which is pretty low. TCU played 6, and then it lost to Kansas State in the Big 12 title game. Then it beat Michigan in the playoff, and then lost to Georgia. So like, that was a fairly tough schedule. Washington ended up playing 4 winning teams in the regular season in Kalen DeBoer's first year when they won 11 games. Indiana and Duke each only played 3, and they got some schedule breaks, I think. Indiana did not have to play Oregon, Penn State, Illinois, Iowa, or Minnesota, and only played 2 teams that finished in the top half of the Big Ten standings last year. And Duke and Mike Elko's first year, there were 9 ACC teams that were bowl eligible, including Duke. Of the other 8, Duke only played 3. So they got the timing was right, I think. And then they're not all these teams had easy non-conference slates for the most part. Indiana played Florida International, Western Illinois, and Charlotte. Duke played Temple, Northwestern, and North Carolina A&T. TCU played Colorado, which was coming off a 1-win season. Tarleton State and SMU, which is a rivalry game. And then Washington played Kent State, Portland State, and a Michigan State team that was ranked at the time, but ended up not being very good that year.
This also, I feel like we are in pursuit of encouraging teams to play tough non-conference schedules, and then we are constantly coming up with stats and data to tell them to play lousy non-conference schedules. So great job by you.
Yeah, it's not surprising, right? I think you would assume it that the schedule worked out in their favor, and we knew that certainly that was the conversation around Indiana last year, but it was also true of these other 4 teams. Sometimes you just kind of nail the timing, and these teams did that.
And we will talk about schedule when we get to the showdown with these 2 teams.
Yeah. The last thing I wanted to kind of talk about, because as I said, all 4 of those teams made pretty large jumps, and they were all 1-year turnarounds. For the sake, I guess, of the fan base's sanity for both Purdue and West Virginia, maybe we don't want to set the bar that high. There are 2 2-year turnarounds that I think are worth looking at. And I didn't look at these as in depth as I did those previous 4, but it's Colorado and Arizona State. Both heavy portal teams. Obviously, they're more in line with what Indiana did last year and with what Purdue and West Virginia are having to do roster wise. Colorado and Arizona State are the only 2 teams that have added 30 plus transfers in each of the last 2 cycles. And I would imagine that West Virginia and Purdue are going to do that, this current cycle that we're in, and then the next one, as well as they reshape the roster. I don't know. It's hard for me to compare anyone to Colorado because Deion Sanders is so unique, and the cult of personality there, I don't think is something that other coaches can strive for because they're not prime. And that's okay. You don't have to be. I think Arizona State is maybe a little more interesting. They were at the bottom, at the end of Herm Edwards. They went 3-9, had to vacate some wins because of recruiting improprieties. Kenny Dillingham went 3-9 again, and so it was back-to-back 3-9 seasons in 2023. And then he spun it into 11-2 and a Big 12 title and a playoff berth in 2024. And I think a couple of things that stood out to me when looking at that is a lot of the portal guys that were huge impact players in 2024 were actually brought in 2023. So he brought in Jordan Tyson, Cam Scadaboo, Xavier Alford, 3 of their 5 best players who were all first team all Big 12 last year were brought in the 2023 portal class. So a good job of identifying guys who have multiple years of eligibility left, who even if they didn't quite hit right away, you could sort of see it on the horizon that they were going to be in a pretty good spot by the end of their careers. And at least in the case of Jordan Tyson, he's still on the roster. I think Alfred is too. Coaching wise, neither Colorado nor Arizona State sort of let a bad thing fester in year 1. Right. The Colorado had Sean Lewis as its offensive coordinator in his first year under Deion Sanders. It wasn't really working well, and they demoted him. And at the time, we thought that was kind of a weird decision. But then, Sean Lewis went to San Diego State, and his offense wasn't very good there either, so maybe it was the right decision. And then Pat Shurmur, I think, did a better job. Deion Sanders also got rid of his defensive coordinator and brought in Robert Livingston, which I think was a great hire. Kenny Dillingham in his first season demoted his play caller and took it over himself for the rest of the season. But I think understanding that he's more of a culture guy, or maybe the program is best suited with him making sure that he was a culture guy, didn't say well, I'm going to call plays again in 2024. He went out and hired Marcus Arroyo to be his offensive coordinator, who was not good as a head coach, but was good as an offensive coordinator. Was good as a play caller last year. So I thought that was interesting. Both coaches saw something that was sort of not exactly where it needed to be in year 1 and immediately made changes. So hopefully West Virginia and Purdue don't find themselves in that position, but if they do, I think it's important to act fast. And then also both those teams got schedule help. Well, both those teams moved from the Pac-12 to the Big 12 and played easier schedules than they did the year before. So that helps too.
And I do think it's a good reminder that, if Purdue and West Virginia don't go to bowls this year, all is not lost, but you can't let stuff fester.
Yeah.
Because as much as Rich Rod and Barry Odom are experienced hires, if it goes wrong, you can also view them as recycle hires, as retread hires. And if it's bad in year one and you let it fester in year two, and year two is bad, there might be people who are ready to be like, okay, this was a bad move. We got this wrong. So no festering. Like, I don't think you get extra time. These guys, I think, have a chance to flip it fairly quickly, but I think maybe they get less time. And Ryan Walters only got 2 years because it was like pretty clearly this is not working. But if you're hiring like a young up and comer, it's like it's going to take him some time to learn the ropes, right? That's not this.
No.
So no festering.
No festering.
Is that a lesson? No festering.
No festering.
Final. What's your overall advice? The things you learned the most through this process of how to rebuild a college football program?
I think the biggest takeaway is the portal stuff is not getting blinded by like brand and being more about production and making sure you're bringing in guys who have done it at some capacity before, even if it's not at the power conference level. I think is my biggest takeaway. And then like hope you get lucky with the schedule. if you're looking for that 1 year sort of expedited turnaround that those four programs had, then you have to get some schedule luck. Looking at Purdue, I wouldn't say Purdue has that. We can talk about that more, but I think those are the two. But you got to get a little lucky, and you have to be very precise, not just turning over the roster because you kind of have to, and you just need bodies, but like actually being thoughtful about it, I think, is maybe the most important thing. Because I don't know that every coaching staff is entirely thoughtful about how they go about the portal. Sometimes it just seems like they're making additions just to make them.
Right. Don't be desperate. The other thing is that there's a lot of quarterback magic in these turnarounds, in these rebuilds.
Yes.
Because Sam Leavitt just fell out of the sky. If Mel Tucker hadn't exploded his career at Michigan State, Sam Leavitt might be leading Michigan State to a 10-win season, and instead he fell in Kenny Dillingham's lap at Arizona State. And obviously Deion Sanders had his kid, and Shadur Sanders was a great Big 12 quarterback, and you already mentioned all the other ones. I don't know that Purdue and West Virginia have that either.
No, I don't think they do either.
Maybe not, which we'll get to right after the break as we start our KOTN showdown between the West Virginia Mountaineers and the Purdue Boilermakers. Doug Lesmerises and Bill Landis back. We're going to run through the showdown. Bill, you are Purdue. I am West Virginia. And did we pair these two teams correctly by saying they're the two teams that fired coaches and are trying to figure it out?
Yeah, I think so. This might be the pairing that makes the most sense.
Okay.
The pairing we have done thus far.
So what we do in the showdown, we try to say, who would you rather be in 2025? Win totals. West Virginia, 5.5 on FanDuel. Over under win total. Purdue, 3.5. Quarterback, skill position, offensive line, defensive front seven, secondary coaching, and schedule / intangibles. We always start at quarterback. Bill Landis, what's Purdue got at quarterback?
It seemed like Purdue had a staff that was not totally enamored with what was on the roster quarterback wise in the spring. So they brought in the winter portal Malachi Singleton from Arkansas, former big time recruit, but didn't play a ton at Arkansas. Played in 4 games last year. Had a pretty good game like in mop up duty against Ole Miss, but not a ton of experience. And they brought in Evan Chuba from Washington State, who was a 3-star prospect in the 2024 class. So he was a freshman last year. Didn't play at Washington State, has 4 years of eligibility left. And those two guys went through the spring along with Bennett Meredith, who was already on the roster. And I don't think Purdue felt great about anyone. Like Bennett, the stuff out of spring was that Bennett Meredith was like the most consistent, which I don't think is what Purdue was looking for with bringing in, especially Malachi Singleton. So an interesting thing happened in the spring portal window. Ryan Brown, who was at Purdue last year, started a couple games, had an excellent game in the game that Purdue lost in overtime to Illinois. Dual threat guy, like kind of exciting, if not a little bit erratic. He left to go to UNC after last season, I think believing he was going to have a real shot to be UNC's starting quarterback. And then UNC went and got Gio Lopez from South Alabama. So then Ryan Brown went back to Purdue. So Brown was not with Purdue in the spring, so he wasn't part of that competition. But my guess is that he's the starter because I don't know. I guess it's a new staff and it doesn't matter all that much that he's been around the program. He was at Purdue for 2 years. He still has 3 years of eligibility left. He does have the most meaningful experience of anyone who's kind of like in this competition. It'll either be him or Singleton. But I guess I would lean Brown just because he's like kind of done it in a Purdue uniform before. And if you can sort of like bottle up what he did in that Illinois game and then extrapolate it over a season, you have something I think you can build around skill set wise. And I also think we'll talk more about the roster. You're going to need a quarterback who can run, and Singleton can run, but we know Brown can run. Brown's really athletic. So I think that might give him a leg up too. So my guess is that it's going to be Ryan Brown.
Are you prepared for we were together, we maybe both thought we could do better, we maybe both figured out that we can't do better, and now we're back together again? It is a beautiful Northern college football story in the making.
Yeah, we like that. I hope it works out for everybody. It would be nice to look back on the back and forth nature of this offseason between the two, and for them to come together for something meaningful would be beautiful.
Can I just ask quickly off the top, as you went through the Purdue roster and I went through the West Virginia roster and you checked out what happened in spring ball, were many of your conclusions, I have no freaking idea what's going to happen?
Yes.
Because the whole roster is new and they did this in spring ball and then they added 17 more guys in the spring portal, which is maybe some indication of they didn't love what they saw in spring. And how can you know who's going to start and who's going to play? And it is a complete wild card at every single position going into August.
There's one Purdue position where I know what's going to happen, and otherwise I have no idea.
Okay. We could end this there. It's a tie. We don't know. Good luck. But we won't do that. I need to do something very important here, and I'm trying to make this a tenet of what we do here at Kings of the North, and that is to take responsibility and be accountable, because too often people get on a show, they get on a podcast, and they just talk, and they are never accountable for what they say. And when they are occasionally right, they remind you a million times, and when they are often wrong, they ignore it. I may have done that in the past. I would like to say, I think it's possible that I ruined Garrett Green and West Virginia last year. That it is not only incorrect that I thought he and West Virginia might both be really good. I think I may have caused the downfall, because I went to Big 12 Media Days and had a conversation, and I found the headline from our show about Garrett Green being more of a reckless quarterback. And I think we had a headline on KOTN that was like West Virginia's reckless winning quarterback plan. And I just would like to state for the record that Garrett Green in 2023 had 16 touchdowns and 4 interceptions. Last year, he had 15 touchdowns and 12 interceptions. In 2023, he had 31 big-time throws and 7 turnover-worthy plays. Last year, he had 18 big-time throws and 15 turnover-worthy plays. I got in his head. I told him to let it rip. And I got Neil Brown fired, and I apologize.
Well, at least we can find someone responsible for it, because I was a little confused.
Yeah.
So I'm glad it's you. Yeah.
So this year, much like Purdue, West Virginia has a familiar guy and a new guy. Their familiar guy didn't leave and come back. It's Nico Marchiol, who's been there as a 4th-year guy. He's 3-0 as a starter at West Virginia. He's had to fill in when Garrett Green's been hurt. He's a solid guy. And then they have Jalen Henderson, who is coming in from Texas A&M. He spent 2 years at Fresno State, 2 years at Texas A&M, started the last 4 games at Texas A&M in 2023 as the Jimbo Fisher era was imploding, and then was hurt all last year. So Henderson, 6'3", 223. Marchiol, 6'2", 226. They have similar experience, and they're both left-handed. How about that?
All right.
two left-handed quarterbacks? I have no idea. Max Brown's also there. He's played at Charlotte in Florida a little bit. Most people seem to think it's going to be either Marchiol or Henderson. I have no idea how you would tell right now. I think both possibly could work because they both can scoot. Put on film, they're scooters.
Need to scoot in that offense.
They'll be scooting.
Yeah.
So like that's like that like scooting required in a rebuild, right? Scooting is a necessity. So both these guys can move, and then it's one of those things you get caught up in the left-handed quarterback throws. It's like, does that look weird? It's like, it's just because he's left-handed. So this is what you have to do. Like, you can't just rely on what you had. You have to go take a swing on somebody. You're not going to get to take the biggest swing. The best quarterback in the portal is not going to come to your place when you just fired your head coach. Mm-hmm. So I have no idea, but I think West Virginia might be okay because Marchiol's been the plan. Marchiol's been the plan to replace Garrett Green. So like this is, I think Nico Marchiol, if Neil Brown was still there, was going to be the starting quarterback this year. So that's nothing has changed. And then they brought in a guy who started 4 games at Texas A&M 2 years ago as an alternate, maybe. So it's not like the firing of the coach blew up their quarterback room. And also, if Ryan Walters was back, would Ryan Brown be Purdue's quarterback?
Maybe, possibly, yeah,
possibly. So a lot of times, like, this is the things you have to deal with. You fire your head coach, you blow up your quarterback room. It didn't completely happen at either of these two places. And then they also tried something in the portal. So I don't know. Does it feel like both have a chance to maybe be okay at QB?
I think, yeah, maybe West Virginia a little more than Purdue. It is interesting to me that like Marchiol has long been the plan. I think to the point where there were times where people wanted him to start instead of Garrett Green. But he's not a slam dunk to be the starter now. It's a little odd to me. But I guess there's a skill set thing there too, that like he can move, but maybe not as well as you'd like.
You can put on some stuff of Henderson in his. I was watching his first start against Mississippi State. They're just like running QB draw with him, and he looks like he's shot out of a cannon. Right. They're similar size, but Marchiol is just a little more physical. Like his big run highlight is he's running over safeties. He's lowering his shoulder and blowing guys up. So they both can run. They different styles. I don't know. It might be stylistic, but I also, and the one thing Rich Rod said in spring was the quarterbacks weren't getting rid of the ball fast enough. So it's more, they both can run well enough that it's going to be whoever can read it and rip it, diagnose it, and get the ball out of your hands to the playmakers and throw some wide receiver screens. That's who's going to win the job. And it feels like people think it's going to be Marchiol, but then Henderson has a chance. I think it's West Virginia quarterback though.
Yeah, I would lean West Virginia. Yes.
All right. Let's go to skill positions. What do you got for Purdue?
So the one spot where Purdue has a returning starter is at running back with Devin Mockabee. Has been Purdue's, I think he's been the leading rusher the last 3 years. I actually did not know this. So he's flirted with 1,000 yards every year. He's not quite broken it. He is 1,169 yards away from Mike Allstott's program rushing record, which I actually think could be out there for him because I think Purdue's going to run the ball a lot this year.
Okay,
and he'll certainly be the number one back. So like, it's nice to have a guy who's been productive in the Big Ten, at least one guy who's been productive in the Big Ten back on this roster. And Devin Mockabee is that. Receiver, no idea. They brought in 7 transfer receivers. The leading returning receiver, the guys who were on the roster last year, is Denylon Morissette, who was a transfer from Georgia last year, caught 11 passes in 2024 for Purdue. I'm sure he's part of the mix, but I don't think there's any expectation that he's going to be the number one receiver. I think the guy who's most interesting among the transfers is Nitro Tuggle, who is a former 4-star prospect in the 2024 class. He was number 102 overall, so he's just outside the top 100. He was at Georgia last year. He played in 8 games as a true freshman. He was suspended. He was suspended in the spring. Yeah. He was suspended in the spring because of a speeding and reckless driving arrest. And then he transferred. He's from Indiana. He was the number 2 player in the state in 2024, and Purdue tried to get him out of high school. Obviously, they didn't, and they got him now. Like, I don't know. You don't love bringing in a guy who's driving recklessly, but on the football field, he had some talent coming out of high school, and maybe it could be good for them. I'm not sure.
His name's Nitro.
His name is Nitro. Another Indiana kid who was at Tulsa last year is Corey Smith. He was a freshman last year, played in 11 games. And then they also added David Washington from Utah, so there's 3. He was a freshman last year too. So I think it's very likely that their top 3 receivers are 3 guys who were freshmen last year at other programs. But like of the 7, there's not one among the 7 who's like, oh, this guy did a lot. Like there's nothing. There are young guys, there are old guys. None of them have been productive at major college football. So I have no idea what to expect from Purdue's receiving core this year, other than thinking they're going to run the ball a lot. They did add at least experienced guy at tight end. They lost Max Clare to Ohio State. They lost Drew Bieber to Minnesota. They brought in 4 transfer tight ends. One of them is Christian Moore, who started all 13 games for UNLV last year. He's more of a blocker than he's a pass catcher. He has like practically no receiving production, but he was like, if you look at PFF grades, he was a very good blocker last year. So he at least has that going for him. But I think good at running back, because Maccabee, I think is solid. Huge question mark at receiver, and probably pretty okay at tight end, at least from a blocking standpoint, even though they lost Max Clare, who's an excellent receiver at tight end.
So if running back is the best thing about Purdue, they're still not going to win that against West Virginia, because West Virginia has Jaheim White back. Jaheim White last year, 149 carries for 845 yards, 5.7-yard average, 7 touchdowns, 842 yards as a freshman, 845 as a sophomore, only 13 touches a game last year. What if he gets closer to 20?
Yeah.
You are looking at potentially a breakout star if they give him the ball more. And CJ Donaldson, who shared the backfield with him last year, 163 carries for 734, 4.5 yards per carry, 11 touchdowns. He transferred to Ohio State. So he goes from a timeshare at West Virginia to a timeshare at Ohio State. You're very enthused about CJ Donaldson at Ohio State, but Jaheim White's a player, right? We all like Jaheim White. He's a dude.
He's got real juice. Yeah.
Like keeping a guy like that after a coaching change, well done by West Virginia. And then they have brought in 4 running back transfers, 3 of whom gained 1,000 yards at where they were last year. Ty Edwards, who is in his 7th year of college football, gained more than 1,000 yards at Northern Iowa. Sincere Bowers gained more than 1,000 yards at Iowa Junior College, and Cannon Katzer gained more than 1,100 yards at Division II Ferris State. But the most interesting guy is the guy who didn't get to 1,000 yards last year. It's Jalen Knighton, who was a former big-time recruit, was at Miami, and then was at SMU, was hurt all last year. But the year before at SMU in 23, 745 yards, 5.5 yards per carry average. That's probably what it's going to be, Jaheim White and Jalen Knighton. And then also there's a Dior Hubbard, is a second-year guy from Ohio who's a pretty solid recruit, who's in the pipeline and I think is part of their future plan. But this is part of it, Landis. They brought in Jalen Knighton and 3 other guys who gained 1,000 yards last year. So I don't know. Like, I think they lost CJ Donaldson, but I think they'll be okay, and maybe more than okay at running back, because I think White and Knighton's a pretty good combo.
I think it's a good combo, and then the quarterback's going to run too. I'm just looking at this. So Jacksonville State last year ran the ball where Rich Rod was, ran the ball basically 66% of the time. The only 3 teams that ran it more were Army, Air Force, and Navy.
Okay.
Do you think they run it more than 70% of the time this year with that stable of running backs?
Hold on, because there is another potential breakout star here, I think.
Okay.
And it's at receiver. So 4 of their 5 top pass catchers are gone. Hudson Clement transferred to Illinois. Cole Taylor, the tight end, went to the pros. He was really good. Traylon Ray transferred to Ole Miss. They were the 3 guys who got the ball last year. Rodney Gallagher's back at receiver. Preston Fox is back at receiver. But the thing that really matters, Jaden Bray, who's an Oklahoma State transfer who got hurt in the middle of last year, he'll be back. Cam Vaughn was Jacksonville State's leading receiver last year as a redshirt freshman. He had come to Jacksonville State as a quarterback. He moved to receiver last year, 48 catches, 803 yards. He was 9 for 183 in the bowl game, and they just throw him screens, and he explodes. He's 6'2". During the bowl game, they said he's the fastest guy on the team. He's got good hands. I think he has a chance to take West Virginia by storm a little bit. Because this is right. This is one of those, come as a quarterback, switch to receiver. Your first year as a receiver, you're the best receiver on the team. And now you're going to West Virginia, and Rich Rod knows you. So I think that's like a real thing. And then they added Jeff Weimer from Idaho State, was 1,000-yard receiver last year. Oron Singleton from Eastern Michigan was second team All-MAC last year. They have a couple guys. So I think between Rodney Gallagher returning, Cam Vaughn, I think, is going to be their best receiver. They have 2 other veterans from smaller schools. Tight end's going to be a little iffy after Cole Taylor. I think they have some guys, Landis, and I am very enthused. about what this is going to look like, because I don't know that they have any quarterback that either their quarterbacks would be as involved in the run game as they were last year running the quarterback. So now you're getting into RPO stuff where you're throwing a little bit more. So just like fake it to Jaheim White and throw it to Cam Vaughn. And I'm on alert for Cam Vaughn breakout season. I actually kind of like West Virginia's skill. And I think West Virginia gets the edge here.
Yeah, I like Devin Maccabee, and then there's not a receiver like, oh, I'm excited about this guy. So for Purdue. So I think it's West Virginia, probably by a fairly significant margin here when you talk about skill positions.
Cam Vaughn, 6'2" and fast. High school quarterback who moved to receiver last year, will be in his third year of college at West Virginia, and Rich Rod gave him the ball last year. So I just like be on alert. Okay. Offensive line. I'll start here. This will be fast. Everybody's gone. Wyatt Milam, 11 starts at left tackle, third round NFL draft pick. Thomas Rymack, 13 starts at guard, transferred to Virginia Tech. Brandon Yates, starter at center, out of eligibility. Jaquay Hubbard, starter at right guard, out of eligibility. Nick Malone, starter at right tackle, out of eligibility. And then Johnny Williams, the fourth, who was their sixth offensive lineman last year, transferred to Missouri, where he's probably going to be their starting left tackle. So everybody's gone.
Did they bring in good players to replace them?
They brought in 4,000 offensive linemen in the transfer portal. So like, they added 6 in the winter and 5 in the spring. And are we here to run through every single offensive line possibility for two teams who are going to go into August and just be like, run guys out there and be like, go get it? Like there's so many possibilities here. We have to give props to your guy, Walter Youngbear, starting guard at Tulsa, more than 1,000 career snaps. He's going to start on the offensive line for sure. They got Carson Lee is a Mississippi State interior offensive lineman who made 16 starts at Mississippi State between center and guard. I think he's going to start. North Alabama offensive tackle Michael Clay, 12 starts at right tackle last year. He might start. Austin P. Donovan Haslam, 9 starts at left tackle last year. He might start. But that's spring. They brought in Lee, Clay, and Haslam are all spring additions who all were starters last year. That's spring additions. They went through the spring and would be like, we got to go get 3 starters. So like, this is what like Youngbear is going to start. And then there's a lot of stuff that I don't know what's going to happen. Landon Livingston was their backup center last year. He's a returning guy with a chance to start. They had like 11 portal guys, half of them who came after spring football. I have no idea. But Walter Youngbear is going to be a starting guard. He's pretty good. And I like, there's a couple up transfers. Their 2 tackles might be up transfers who started last year. Yeah. Which that always gets us at least curious, if not enthused.
Yeah. I mean, Purdue's in a very similar situation there. Everyone's gone. They only brought in 9, as I mentioned before. But I actually, all things considered, kind of like what they've done, at least from a experience standpoint. So I'll run through again. Everyone's gone. They need 5 new starters. Jalen St. John comes from UNLV, started 23 games at left tackle there the last 2 years, was second team All Mountain West last year. He's going to start, just a matter of does he start at tackle, does he start at guard, but he's definitely going to start. Jude McCoskey technically comes from Tulane, but he was only there for the spring. He was at Indiana State the last 2 years, started 20 games at both tackle spots, transferred to Tulane, spent the spring there, and now was transferred to Purdue. So he's got 2 years of starting experience at tackle. Braden Joyner is a young guy from Auburn, started 5 games at guard last year and was a redshirt freshman, but he was named to the SEC All-Freshman team as a starter at guard for Auburn. Tyrell Green is from Eastern Kentucky. He's also young. He started 10 games at guard as a true freshman and was an FCS freshman All-American at Eastern Kentucky last year. And then there's Joey Tanona, who was on the roster, didn't start last year, was a backup. He was 2 years at Notre Dame and then 1 year at Purdue last year. Those 5 guys, 4 of whom have played, I think, somewhat significantly. Jalen St. John, Jude McCoskey, Braden Joyner, Tyrell Green, Joey Tanona. From those 5, I think you're getting your 4 starting guards and tackles. And then center, I think, is super interesting. Purdue brought in a guy named Giordano Vaccaro from the University of Manitoba.
Yeah, he did.
Where he was a 3-year starter as a guard and was named the best offensive lineman in Canadian college football last year. And he is moving to center.
How are you not in Manitoba right now investigating this?
He's moving to center, and like reports are that he had a good spring playing center. Like he was pretty solid.
Great.
It's like the thing that's sort of like not up for debate is that Giordano Vaccaro is going to be Purdue starting center. And then, as I mentioned before, the other 4 transfer additions are just like young guys who I think could develop and eventually be starters. One of them is Marcus Easley from Georgia, who was a 4-star prospect in 2024. He's from Illinois. And another is Mark Nabe Jr. from Kentucky, who was a 3-star prospect in 2024, from Ohio, who was once committed to Ohio State. His recruitment was weird. Like he was a 4-star, I think, when he committed to Ohio State, then actually like lost a star. But he's got like some upside if he gets his stuff together. But I think like in terms of starting experience, Purdue did a pretty good job, and like I think Vaccaro is fascinating. Like I'm super excited to see what that guy is as the starting center for Purdue this year. So like I don't know, do I love it? No, because everyone's gone and they got to figure out a starting offensive line, and it's all portal. But that it's all portal and they're not shopping at the top of the offensive line market. I actually think Purdue did an okay job.
Yeah, two guys I wanted to mention that I forgot to mention. Robbie Martin was the number 1 offensive lineman in high school in West Virginia 2 years ago, went to North Carolina State last year and didn't play, and they got him back. So that's kind of a nice move. Again, like a young guy that you're not expecting. It's like he's a West Virginian and he came home. And then Xavier Bosley was a starting right tackle for Rich Rod at Jacksonville State in 2023. He transferred to West Virginia last year, and so didn't really play. Only played 25 snaps at West Virginia last year, but Rich Rod knows him. So again, like they have like 9 guys that I think they can find 5. It's just, I actually think they had a pretty good offensive line last year, and it didn't really get them anywhere.
Like the coach got fired at the end of the year was going to be a great offensive line.
Yeah. And it was veteran, and they had 4 guys who were out of eligibility, and the other guy they would have had back transferred and is going to start in the SEC. So I think it's Purdue here, but it's mostly I'm confused about West Virginia, but I don't think it's terrible. I see what they're trying, and again, what does it tell you when you go that West Virginia went and got 6 more guys on the offensive line in the spring portal window after spring practice? Does that tell you things went wrong?
Yes.
Oh my God. Okay. I was trying to spin that like we're just being proactive. We're just open to good players, but that maybe is a little bad.
Or maybe it's that like you just couldn't get all your work done in the winter, because it's a lot when you're bringing in this many guys, right? So you just sort of use what you had and then knowing you were going to go get more in the spring.
So just to reinforce this again, offensive side of the ball, the 16 guys for West Virginia last year who played the most offensive snaps, 8 are gone to the NFL or the pros. They were out of eligibility. 5 transferred, only 3 are back. So 3 of 16 back. You were going to lose half of them anyway, but then you throw in 5 transfers and you're turning the whole roster over. So that's the offensive side of the ball. Let's go to defense front.
I had the same number for Purdue. So
15
guys played 200 snaps for Purdue on offense last year. 3 are back.
3 are back. Okay.
Yeah.
So 3 guys on offense that matter for each team.
Yeah.
Who had roles last year. So like that's and for West Virginia, it's 2 receivers and Jaheim White. So
yeah.
And for Purdue, it's Devin Mockbee
it's Devin Mockbee and like 2 backup receivers. Yeah.
Yeah. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
So the whole meat of the offense is totally new. All right. Yeah. Defensive side of the ball, front 7, Purdue. What do you got?
Purdue got a pretty interesting defensive end addition in the portal. CJ Nunnally from Akron started his career actually at Jackson State, then transferred to Akron. He was first team All-MAC the last 2 years. 26 and a half tackles for loss and 13 sacks the last 2 years. Like that's a pretty good ad, I think, for Purdue. A guy who I think potentially could be an impact player. I think like defensive end might be okay because they added him. They added Miles Mitchell from Monmouth, who started 23 games there. He's less productive than like a Nunnally, but he's played a ton. He's moving up, but he's played a ton. They had a guy named Braylon Charles from North Texas, who's like a former JUCO All-American, who's also played a lot. And then there's 2 returning guys. CJ Madden was at Georgia for 2 years, transferred to Purdue, only played in 3 games last year because he got hurt. But when they got him, they thought it was a huge deal. And like now he's healthy, and they're hoping that he can play a lot. And then the other one is Trace Smith, who transferred from Illinois last year. He played more than Madden, wasn't hyper productive, but I guess they're not giving up hope that both Madden and Smith can be impact players for them. And then you mix in like Nunnally and Miles Mitchell, and I think defensive end can be serviceable at the very least. Defensive tackle too, maybe. They added TJ Lindsey from Auburn, who was a freshman last year, another 4-star prospect. He only played in 1 game, but he's a big cat. He's 6'3", he's 295. He was like one of the standouts of the spring for Purdue. I think like Purdue's feeling very good about getting him on the field a lot and him producing as a guy who's a fairly well-regarded recruit, and he'll actually play next to a guy who was on the team last year, Jamarian Harkless, who only played 127 snaps. He is 346 pounds.
Oh yeah,
he's a big dude. He's going to eat up a lot of space, and I think there's hope that if he does that, maybe the guys around him can produce at a fairly high level. There's a good track record of like edge and outside linebacker production in Barry Odom's defenses, and there's optimism that they have like the guys who can take advantage of that at the outside, at the defensive end position and at linebacker, which I think is actually the most interesting thing that Purdue has done here. Manny Powell came from UNLV. He wasn't their top linebacker last year, but he played 420 snaps. He knows the defense. He was also at Arkansas with Barry Odom, so he's followed Barry Odom from Arkansas to UNLV to now to Purdue. So like he knows this defense like the back of his hand. I think he'll be like the kind of like the quarterback kind of the defense. But the guy who's far more interesting addition to linebacker is Sanders Ellis from Tennessee State. He was the Ohio Valley Conference Freshman of the Year last year. He was a finalist for the Jerry Rice Award, which is given to the best freshman in the FCS. He had 86 tackles, 15.5 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks. When he went into the portal after Eddie George left Tennessee State, Tennessee, Auburn, Virginia Tech were like some of the schools that were after him, and Purdue got him.
Nice.
Jackson Woodard was a super productive linebacker in this defense at UNLV. He was the Mountain West Conference Defensive Player of the Year last year. And I think Sanders Ellis is going to play like the same position and do the same stuff. And he's explosive and he's got decent size at 6'2", 225. I think he's versatile. He can move around a little bit. If there's like someone that Purdue brought in who I think could like be stars too strong of a word, but like a very good Big Ten defender, I think it might be Sanders Ellis. Like that is a very exciting addition for Purdue. So like I think linebacker will be good. And I actually think defensive line, again, all things considered, with everybody leaving, they actually have some continuity there with backups and brought in some noteworthy additions. So I think the front seven can be okay.
Our guy John with a friendly reminder to like the video. Give a thumbs up if you like our West Virginia Purdue breakdown. Defensive line, West Virginia, 5 of their top 6 guys gone. But they were out of eligibility. This was going to happen anyway, and none of them were drafted. West Virginia only had one guy drafted. It was Wyatt Milam, the left tackle. So this is always like one of those, they lost these guys. They're not losing guys that the NFL picked. Doesn't mean they aren't good players. So 3 of the top 8 back. One of the guys who's interesting is back is Edward Vesterinen, who started every game in 2023 and got hurt in the preseason last year and missed the whole year, but he's back. So he's not one of their top 8 guys from last year, but he's been that. And he's probably going to start for them. Hammond Russell, the 4th on the inside, was a backup last year. He's the guy among the top 6 who is back. I think he's a good player. He will help them. And then the rest is going to be transfers, I think. Asani Redwood's back as well. Jamori Robinson, West Virginia also has like a headline defensive guy. He was the American Athletic Conference Defensive Player of the Year last year. He had 10.5 sacks, which tied for 10th in the country. He's a 7th-year guy. 2 years at junior college, 4 years at Texas San Antonio. 6'5", 250. He's from Virginia. West Virginia beat out Virginia Tech in the portal to get him. And you know what's up, Landis. Like this guy could make some noise in the Big 12. Yes.
Yeah. Who is Trey Moore from UTSA went to Texas, right? A couple years ago, and I think has been pretty good for. I think that's right. So yeah, that's a huge addition for West Virginia. That's a guy who's like, I don't know. He should be going to play for one of the better defenses in the country, and he's going to play for West Virginia. It's huge.
Yeah. Braden Siders, 6th-year guy from Wyoming, 25 starts at Wyoming. He's also in the mix. It's I would say Robinson and then Curtis Jones, who's a developmental guy at West Virginia. 2nd-year guy, played all special teams last year. He was an all-state running back in West Virginia, but was recruited as a linebacker, like as an edge guy. I think he'll play. And then Vesterinen and Hammond Russell on the inside, pretty decent. Linebacker they lost 2 great guys. This is where the coaching change really hurt them. Trey Latham transferred to Kansas, and Josiah Trotter, who was a star in the making, transferred to Missouri. That really hurts. Their 3rd and 4th linebackers from last year are both back, Reed Carrico and Ben Cutter. They did add some good transfers. Chase Wilson is a 6th-year guy, was 2nd team All Mountain West at Colorado State last year. I think he's going to start. Ashton Woods was a freshman at North Carolina last year. And then Ben Bogle is their linebacker spring transfer, 100 tackles at Southern Illinois last year. So they're probably only playing like 2 linebackers most of the time. So I do think it might be like Chase Wilson and Reed Carrico. who are on the field the most, and then you work in Cutter, you work in Bogle. Again, you add a 100-tackle guy from Southern Illinois in the spring. Maybe you're looking for something there. But I think there's enough pieces there for it to be okay. And I think there's enough pieces on the defensive line for it to be okay. So who wins the front seven?
I think it's close.
Jamoy Robinson is a dude.
Yeah. I think that's right. I think I probably would lean West Virginia slightly, but it's close. And I guess I would say that, like, you really worry about offensive line front seven when like transitions like this happen. And I actually think that it's not the worst it could be, which is like, I know it's like, it's not totally reassuring, but given the situations they were in, I think both teams ended up in an okay spot.
As we're going through this, are you hearing enough names for both teams as we're looking for the transfer guys that matter?
Yeah.
We know they have a million of them, but like when you hear Jamory Robinson, when you hear, say, the Purdue guy again that you think could be a star from Tennessee State?
Sanders Ellis.
When you hear some of these names, is it like, okay, I see what's up?
Yeah, I think the only position where Purdue like didn't add somebody who would fit that category is receiver. Everywhere else, I think they found enough guys who fit that category to pique my interest at the very least. Yeah.
All right. Secondary for Purdue.
Tony Grimes is here.
There he is. Oh yeah.
Former 5-star prospect way back in 2020. He's on his fourth school. Started at UNC, went to Texas A&M, didn't play there because he got hurt. Went to UNLV and kind of like rejuvenated his career. Probably had the best year of his career last year at UNLV, and now he's here at Purdue. So he'll be one of the starting corners. The other starting corner probably will be a transfer as well, either TD Williams from Central Arkansas, who's played a ton, or Ryan Turner from Boston College and previously Ohio State, who's not really played all that much. There are also some guys, Smiley Bradford and Hadori Hines were on the roster as like backup corners. I think they'll all be in that mix to try to be the other corner to start opposite Tony Grimes. Nickel more than likely will be a guy named Sterling Smith, who was on the roster last year, started his career at Holy Cross, transferred to Purdue last year. Didn't play a whole lot, but I think had like a solid spring and seems to be seizing the nickel spot.
Okay.
Safety, more transfers at safety. Crew Wakely from BYU is now at Purdue. He's going to start at strong safety. He started 16 games for BYU and like was pretty good when he was on the field. It was a weird deal where he wasn't on scholarship.
He has some juice.
He wasn't on scholarship at BYU and wasn't going to be put on scholarship, so he transferred. Which I don't really begrudge him doing. So he'll start a strong safety. I think he's a pretty solid player. Started his career at Utah State, BYU, and now at Purdue. And then there are some other transfers. Hershey McLaurin, who's on his third school, West Virginia, Houston, now Purdue. Taj Rael, who's on his third school, Old Dominion, Memphis, now Purdue. Have both started, have both played a decent amount. They've combined for 36 starts and have 10 years of college football experience between the two of them. So Wakely in one spot, and then probably either McLaurin or Taj Rael in the other spot. But all, with the exception of nickel, more than likely, you're looking at 4 transfer starters in the secondary.
So you feel pretty decent, or no?
I think it's okay. Like I think Tony Grimes is Tony Grimes ended up not being the caliber of player people thought he was going to be, but I think has been a solid cornerback. I think Crew Wakely is going to be a solid safety. I don't know, like the second corner spot, the second safety spot, I think are questionable. So it's fine. Could be better.
So West Virginia's secondary has been a problem for a couple of years. It's one of the reasons that Neil Brown got fired. It's one of the reasons they fired their defensive coordinator in the middle of last year. 6 of their top 7 guys are gone. 4 out of eligibility, 2 transferred, but you're not missing anybody. Yeah. So they are rebuilding it almost from scratch. Kikora Tarnu, he actually was with Rich Rod at Jacksonville State, but then was at West Virginia last year and started 5 games. He's probably going to start at safety. He'll be like the only guy that's a familiar name, but they have some pretty good players here. The headline is Michael Coates Jr., who was first team All Mountain West at Nevada last year. He's going to start at a corner spot. Another guy, Fred Perry, was a 3-year starter at Jacksonville State for Rich Rod. He was sort of like a safety there. He's probably going to be the nickel corner safety guy. So that's 2 starters, I think. Tarnu's a 3rd starter. The other safety starters is probably either going to be Justin Harrington, who is an 8th-year guy. 2 at junior college, 4 at Oklahoma, 1 at Washington. 8th year of college football. I was trying to figure out how old he is. I cannot find his birthday. I assume he's old. He might start. And then Jordan Walker is a 6th-year guy. He's young. He was a 3-year starter at Tennessee Chattanooga. So that's an up transfer. I think it's Tarnew and one of those two at safety. And then they have 4 other corners who started last year. Guy at App State, 2 from Akron, and 1 from South Alabama. And I think they have to find another corner starter from that group to go with Coates and Perry. So it's a returning safety, I think 2 legit corners, 4 options for the other corner spot, and 2 veteran safeties. I think they can piece it together, and I'm not sure it can get worse because secondary's been really a bugaboo for West Virginia. And so you start over, it's like, okay, let's start over. I think this will be an improvement for the Mountaineers.
Yeah, it's hard for it not to be, given how bad they were. And the same thing at Purdue, like at the among the most frustrating things with Ryan Walters' tenure at Purdue is like he's a defensive backs guy, and their defensive backs were bad. In addition to everything else in the program, it's like they couldn't get defensive back right. And then even when a new coach took over, there's like nothing on the roster for them to work with. Like everyone left because they weren't good, and they brought in a bunch of new guys. So I probably lean West Virginia slightly.
I think so too. Coates is really. I think Coates and Perry are really good.
Yeah. But I don't think Purdue's in a terrible spot.
No. Defensively for Purdue, top 16 guys last year, top 10 guys in snaps on defense are all gone. The top 16, 8 were gone anyway, out of eligibility, 4 transferred, 4 back, but none of the top 10. So again, it's a complete reset. And where it hurts the most is you had a chance to have Trey Lathan and Josiah Trotter be your starting linebackers this year. Yeah. They're not going to be. The rest of it, you were going to have to revamp it anyway. So
200 guys play, or sorry, not 200 guys, 17 guys played 200 snaps on Purdue's defense last year. One's back. One's back. Yeah.
So I think we're illustrating what a complete teardown it is. And this is when you are a losing team with a coaching change in the modern era. I don't think this is unusual, right? We're not.
No, it's not. But they also had like Will Help,
defensive
end with the Clemson.
Dylan Thieneman went to Oregon, and Max Clare went to Ohio State. Like they had superstars.
There's a defensive tackle too, whose name is escaping me, who went to Texas.
This is Purdue's been able to have a couple dudes, but like you're not going to keep your dudes. You're not going to keep your dudes when you tear it down. You go 1-11. You tear it down. You fire everybody. In this era, they're gone. I don't think there's no head coach unless you had hired Nick Saban. There's no head coach who's going to get Max Clare and Dylan Thieneman to stay, right?
Yeah. No, I don't think so. No.
Okay. Coaching, Rich Rodriguez. If he had stayed at West Virginia the whole time, his first year at West Virginia was 2001. He was there from 2001 to 2007. If he had just stayed, he'd be the second longest tenured head coach in college football behind only Kirk Ferentz. He'd be ahead of Kyle Whittingham at Utah and Mike Gundy at Oklahoma State. So what would be better? What would you rather have? So we don't know exactly if he's in his 25th year at West Virginia, he's been good enough to keep his job. So would you rather have, I've been here for 25 years, I'm the Kirk Ferentz of West Virginia, I'm Don Nehlen's successor, like this is what we do, we're like Iowa where you have coaches for a quarter of a century? Or do you sort of would you rather have refreshed, revamped, I went out and saw the rest of the world, it blew up in my face at Michigan, it was okay at Arizona, I got my mojo back at Jacksonville State, and I'm back 62 years old and refreshed? What version of Rich Rod is better for West Virginia? Never left Rich Rod or back for a second go-round Rich Rod?
I might lean never left.
I'm only bringing it up because I think you could argue refreshed second go round. I think you could argue it. Yeah. Like, don't take anything for granted. He's been saying, he said it a million times, right? I never should have left like that. So, but then you didn't have time to get tired of him. Because ask Iowa fans, as good as Kirk Ferentz has been, would you rather have, I've never left Kirk Ferentz, or I went out and saw the world and now I'm back Kirk Ferentz? Because there have been some rough times at Iowa. Even though you stayed for a quarter century, it hasn't all been rainbow and unicorns.
That's true. I don't know. I guess if you can guarantee me that Rich Rod does have some fresh perspectives on things, and I guess maybe it was worthwhile. But I don't
know.
That's
I can't guarantee anything. There's no guarantees here.
Right.
When he took over at West Virginia the first time, they had been 39-31 in the previous 6 years. Now, as he takes over the 6 years under Neil Brown, they were 37-36. So in a similar situation, he brought 4 assistants from Jacksonville State. As I mentioned, he also has his son, Rhett, was an analyst at Jacksonville State last year, is now going to be the quarterback's coach. But the big thing as we talk about coaching here is they hired Zach Alley from Oklahoma. They are paying him $1.5 million, and they paid his $300,000 buyout at Oklahoma. He made $850 at Oklahoma last year. And last year, West Virginia's defensive coordinator, who got fired, Jordan Leslie, made $775. So they're paying their defensive coordinator twice as much, which is probably making Neil Brown say, why didn't you let me hire a defensive coordinator for $1.5 million? I still might have my job. But this is a little more so.
Rid of you.
I know. I know. It was like, oh, he won 9 games. Oh, man. I guess we gotta. So, I mean, But this is a little bit, it's like, this is the Cignetti stuff too. It's like, we fired a guy, we brought in somebody good, but also we're like invested. And so this is a signal. It doesn't guarantee anything, but that's the most interesting thing. The 2 most interesting parts of when you talk about the coaching here of West Virginia is, are you getting refreshed, revamped, reinvigorated Rich Rod?
Uh-huh.
And you hired a up-and-coming young defensive coordinator by throwing a bunch of money at him. So could that
I'll
work?
bid Oklahoma for him.
And Rich Rod's running the show on offense.
Yeah.
And he kind of knows how to run offense. This could work. If we're playing the play caller game, if we're just going to play callers in the North, Rich Rod and Zach Alley, put that up against people. All right, it's probably not Andy Koltelnicki and Jim Knowles, but it's might be up there, Landis, right?
Could be like top 10. Yeah, top 10 in the North. Yeah, not bad. Yeah.
For a team that just fired everybody, would be pretty good. All right.
Yeah.
How are you analyzing Purdue's coaching?
Just a quick refresher on Barry Odom. He was 25-25 in 4 seasons as Missouri's head coach. He took over for Gary Pinkel, who's like a legend, is a Hall of Famer. He was just the guy after the guy, and it didn't work out well. Went to Arkansas as defensive coordinator, then got the UNLV job. 19-8 at UNLV, made the Mountain West title game twice, lost to Boise State both times. UNLV was bad. Had a losing record in 18 of the previous 20 seasons before Odom got there, including a 7-23 record in the 3 seasons under Marcus Arroyo, who was Odom's predecessor. And then Odom was good. He was 19-8. So he can coach. I just think he needed a reset, and maybe needed to do it not at his alma mater while replacing a legend. So I think he's fine. I don't think that Missouri tenure is indicative of who he is. I think UNLV maybe more is. His defensive coordinator is Mike Scherer, who was a Missouri linebacker who played for Odom and has only ever coached for Odom at Missouri, Arkansas, and UNLV. That defense works. It's Odom's defense. I think they'll be fine on that side of the ball. It is interesting to me that his offensive coordinator, as I mentioned before at UNLV, was Brennan Marion, the go-go offense, kitchen sink kind of gadgety deal they did there at UNLV. And I wondered if he might make a similar kind of funky swing with OC at Purdue, and he really didn't. He hired Josh Henson, who was Lincoln Riley's offensive coordinator and tight ends coach at USC, but he didn't call plays. Obviously, Lincoln Riley called the plays. And interesting to me is that when Odom was the head coach at Missouri, he had a chance to retain Henson as his offensive coordinator when he got that job, and he didn't do it. But now he is hiring him, whatever it is, 8 years down the road. No, I guess 5 or so years down the road, to be their offensive coordinator. So I don't know what the offense is necessarily going to look like. I think they're going to run it a lot because they have to personnel wise. I'm assuming it'll look similar to what USC does with Lincoln Riley, a lot of RPOs, that kind of stuff. Quarterback will run around a lot. So I think the defense will be fine. I think Barry Odom is a good coach. I was tilting my head a little bit at the offensive coordinator hire just because it's not as big of a swing as hiring Brennan Marion was.
So would we say that it's reasonable to have a belief that the Purdue defensive coaching situation is pretty good because that's Barry Odom's side of the ball, and the West Virginia offensive coaching situation is pretty good with Rich Rodriguez's side of the ball, but then Zach Alley is a better hire than Josh Henson, and that gives West Virginia the edge here? I
would agree with that, yeah.
Again, people, West Virginia fans who are watching or listening to this know this, but just so people, this was a gigantic splash when it happened. And again, that you pulled him away from Brent Venables and Oklahoma.
He might have been eager to leave too. He might have seen the writing on the wall.
You might see the writing on the wall. Also, as we said, when you're Brent Venables' defensive coordinator, like what are you? That Brent Venables, like same side head coach. Now you're going opposite side head coach, where Rich Rodriguez is saying, I don't even know what you're doing. It's all yours.
Right.
And that's very attractive. So that was a big time hire, but like good on West Virginia. You doubled the defensive coordinator salary pool.
Yeah.
Good on West Virginia. Schedule and intangibles. West Virginia last year, there were 9 teams with winning records in conference play in the Big 12 last year. And West Virginia, believe it or not, was one of them. They went 5-4 in conference play. They were 0-4 against teams with winning records in conference play. There were 7 teams with losing records in conference play in the Big 12 last year, and West Virginia went 5-0 against them. So they didn't beat anybody good, and they beat everybody they were supposed to. They lost to Penn State. They blew a game against Pitt in the non-conference. Neil Brown lost his mind. And so they have to be like more than that, right? They have to, if you're going to do this, you have to be able to beat somebody good. They're 47-1 to win the Big 12. That's 13th of the 16th teams in the odds. There's kind of like a clear top 7 in the Big 12. They play 4 of those top 7. They only play one team that is supposed to be worse than them, UCF. So they have 4 games in the middle. Okay. And like, that's where their season's going to be made. They play Robert Morris. They should win that. They have a road game at Ohio. They have a 2-for-1 with OU. So they're at Ohio this year. And then Ohio goes to West Virginia in 27 and 29. And they get Pitt at home in the backyard brawl. They got to win those middle games. They have to be a team that can do more than just beat terrible teams. And so that's what's going to be the test. And then also, my guy, Brandon Phoenix, one of the Raspy Voice kids, great West Virginia podcast. We've had the Raspy Voice kids on the show before. I follow him on Twitter. Somebody asked him about what a good first year for Rich Rod would be. He said 500 and beat Pitt.
Yeah.
Rich Rod is 4-3 in the brawl. That includes the devastating 13-9 loss in his last year that knocked West Virginia out of the national championship game. The DraftKings has an early line on the backyard brawl. West Virginia at home is getting 2.5 points. So it's kind of like a coin flip game. I think they could beat Pitt. I think the harder part of that equation is getting to 6-6.
Yeah.
And because I don't know if they're going to be better than 3-6 in the Big 12. So I could see it, but I think that's a reasonable, like that's a good expectation from West Virginia fans. Beat Pitt and be 500. I'm not sure if they'll get there. They could, but it's going to be close. But I think the season, the intangible of this is the entire season might be defined by the brawl. And it will give him wiggle room or put him immediately. People will be giving him side eye thinking, why did we do this again? 13-9, here we are again.
Yeah. I'm a little surprised that bowl eligibility would be enough. Because that's what Neil Brown was doing.
Well, but he's your guy. Yeah. And I think it's an acknowledgement, right? Like Utah, BYU, TCU, Arizona State, right? I mean, they have some tough Big 12 games. They also play 6 games before their first bye. So like they can't let it get away from them early because that's a tough stretch. 3 non-conference and at Kansas, Utah, at BYU before they get a break. So they if they're 2-0 to start and then they skid into the bye at 2-4, that's going to be some bad vibes.
Purdue, just quickly, Purdue coaches have turned it fast before. Joe Tiller took over a 3-8 team and went 9-3 in his first year. Jeff Brom took over a 3-9 team and went 7-6 in his first year. Barry Odom's not going to do that. I guess the good news is they should exceed their 2024 win total because they went 1-11 last year, and they play Ball State and Southern Illinois in the non-conference. You better win both those games. The other non-conference game is a road trip to Notre Dame, unless Purdue is Notre Dame's version of Northern Illinois this year, which like I don't know, I don't want to write off entirely.
Like a MAC team.
Yeah. The Big Ten slate I think is tough. They got a tough draw. Home games against USC, Illinois, Rutgers, Ohio State, and Indiana. So maybe your favorite against Rutgers, maybe. The rest you're not. Road games are Minnesota, Northwestern, Michigan, and Washington. maybe you're like in a pick'em situation with Northwestern. The rest, you're definitely an underdog. I don't think Purdue's built to win at Michigan or win at Washington, and I don't think they're built to win at Minnesota this year. So the win total is 3.5. If you give them the Ball State and the Southern Illinois game to get to 2, maybe you assume they win against either Rutgers or Northwestern to get you to 3, and it's like I guess you got to win both those Rutgers Northwestern games to get to 4, because I just don't see them winning the rest of those games. But like a 4-win season off of a 1-win season is a step in the right direction, I guess. I think Barry Odom's going to get some grace given how much he had to turn this thing around. I think maybe the biggest thing, aside from like don't go 1-11 again, is be more competitive with Indiana, because Indiana blew Purdue's doors off last year, 66-0. Didn't
Kurt Cignetti say they were going to do that and then they did it?
I said they were going to do it. I looked through the bucket records of what the biggest margin of victory was, and I think it was like 69. And I said he's going to try to beat that, and they only beat him by 66. So like he's going to try to do it again.
Yeah,
and like he can't. I don't think Barry Odom has to beat Indiana, but he has to score maybe against Indiana and not give up 66 points to Indiana this year. But I don't know if I'm looking at 3.5. I don't know that I'm running to the window to put a bet on the over based on the schedule.
So we talked a lot at the beginning about the idea of what Kurt Cignetti did in year 1, perhaps putting an unrealistic standard on first-year head coaches, and he did it in the same state as Purdue and Barry Odom. In an intangible discussion, is Barry Odom going to get compared to first-year Kurt Cignetti all year by fans and media in the state of Indiana, or will people get it that he's not bringing his entire team with him from UNLV, right, and maybe that was kind of a lightning in a bottle situation for the Hoosiers?
I think it's inevitable that he will get compared to it. It's probably unfair because it's not. I think if there was an opportunity for Barry Odom to bring his best UNLV players with him to Purdue, he would have done it, just like a lot of those guys were out of eligibility. Like all the best ones were. Like Haj Malik Williams couldn't come over. Jackson Woodard couldn't come over. Who's the receiver that was a special teams guy that blocked punts.
Right.
Couldn't come over, right? So there's just that dynamic didn't exist. He brought some guys, but he couldn't bring his whole team. Or he couldn't bring the core of his team the way that Kurt Cignetti did. So like I hope people understand that. But even if they do, he's still going to get compared. Yeah. I don't think he has to go. He doesn't have to win 11 games, but if Purdue like doesn't beat Rutgers and Northwestern and get to at least 4 wins this season, I think that's going to be, there's be some heat maybe already in that first year because of what Indiana was able to do.
Okay. Ricky White was that UNLV.
Ricky White. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So who are we giving intangibles to?
I would say maybe Purdue, only because the bar's so low. It's like they were 1-11, right?
Yeah.
Improvement is easier to achieve for Purdue.
West Virginia made a bowl. Yeah. That's the thing of like, hey, I expect West Virginia to beat Pitt and go 500. Well, last year they almost beat Pitt and won 500 in the regular season. So it's like, okay, like the standard. I'll buy that. Plus it's nice to get Purdue at least 2. So we went quarterback West Virginia, skill position West Virginia, offensive line Purdue, defensive front 7 West Virginia, secondary West Virginia, coaching West Virginia, intangibles Purdue in 2025. Purdue versus West Virginia, you'd rather be the Mountaineers.
Yes. Yeah.
And pretty decidedly, and if we wanted to play the game of 68 power conference teams, who would you rather be in 2025? I'm sure we could find somebody that we'd rather be Purdue than, but they have a ways to go. They
maybe
just like realistically.
Maybe Northwestern.
Yeah, that's true. Like they just have a ways to go, and they're going to have to get quarterback figured out. But if Ryan Brown can be that guy, that'll be and that's the thing. This might come down, Bill, to either like which team gets the better quarterback play, as both have an internal option and an external option. If somebody finds something, that might be the propulsive effect to get these programs somewhere. All right.
Yeah.
Another KOTN Showdown coming on Wednesday. Also, we think we're going to dig into some of these northern recruiting wins. Michigan just got one. We know John's excited about that. A lot of other things happening in the north. Some really interesting recruiting battles where, Minnesota kept a guy home that Alabama wanted, right? There's stuff going on that we want to talk about. We think we will do that on Wednesday. As always, thanks to you guys for being here, whether you watched it live, watched it back, listened back. We couldn't do it without you. Producer Mike made the graphics while he was on vacation. So thanks for doing that, Mike. And thanks for Bill Landis for boatload of research, brother.
Sure. Happy to do it.
That will do it for this edition. He's Bill Landis. I'm Doug Lesmerises. And that was Kings of the North.